historic vote. And I think it's important, Akbar, that we have 27 Democratic senators, well, 26, but Bernie, let's just say 27 Democratic senators who just voted in the Senate to stop aiding Israel. Now, people might say the bar is so low, it's in hell. Only 27. What are you talking about? But that's a majority of Democratic senators. And when Bernie Sanders brought this a couple of months ago, that number was what, like above a dozen? So the numbers slowly but surely, even in the past year, have been growing. And also, Akbar, one of the names I'm going down the list. We're going to talk about the names and why this is important, what the vote was. But one of the names happens to be Amy Klobuchar. And I'm sure, like me, you have seen that bipartisan photo that came out 2 weeks ago when Benjamin Netanyahu, war criminal, visited. Who was there smiling? Amy Klobuchar. And lo and behold, her name is one of the 27 names. So with that setup, I yield the floor to you.
It's a huge moment, Shahid. I mean, here's the context. Less than 10 months ago, when Bernie Sanders first forced a vote on U.S. weapons for Israel, that was the first time in Senate history that senators ever voted on this. And he got 19 senators at that point. That then went down to 15. Some of the
Right.
senators actually changed their votes. And for them to now go to 27, it's significant because of people like you're mentioning, like Senator Klobuchar. It's significant because of people like Senator Jack Reed, who is the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee. Very much a traditionalist, centrist, national security Democrat, pro-military, who voted for this, and it's what it's showing us is that this issue has become. You have to remember that so many of these senators are getting daily polling. They are getting daily advice from their own political consultants and their own political instincts. So this is not just them suddenly waking up and realizing that, Palestinians are being starved intentionally or that there is mass killing with US weaponry. This is them realizing it is politically untenable now for most Democrats to support continued American weapons for Israel. The fact that you had these 27, you had people come out and give these really strong statements. Raphael Warnock is a great example, who didn't vote with Bernie Sanders on this in April, faces a really tough re-election battle, and still came out and said, I have to support this right now. So you're seeing a huge amount of senators, and it's honestly a moment. I've been covering, foreign policy on the Hill for more than a decade. I would never have imagined we would see close to a third of the Senate voting against weapons to Israel.
Yeah, so I posted this just right before you came on, and someone said, I mean, is it really a big deal? One of my followers on Blue Sky,
Yeah.
and there's a genocide, and okay, fine. I mean, I guess you could say, wow, but I have the gray hair, Akbar. I'm a bit older than you, and in my lifetime, if you would have told me 2 years ago that 27 senators, forget Democrat, forget Republican, 27 senators would vote to stop funding aid to Israel. I'm like, get that. Not in my lifetime. 27, you might get 10. And even if you get 10 double digits, I'd be like, that is remarkable. To get 27 is, I think, a watershed moment that is proving yet again, in addition to what you said, the poll numbers, like there are so many markers, I think, in the past 3 weeks that show that the tide has shifted. And I was telling folks that, with the gray hair, there's only one other time I've seen in my life such a remarkable, quick, sudden shift on an issue. One was during Obama term one and Obama term two on marriage equality. Folks, I'm old, right? I remember seeing the Ellen DeGeneres Time magazine cover. I remember when we didn't know that gay people existed except in San Francisco. I grew up in the Bay Area. And it was just one of those things, right? And you used to openly say stuff like "smear the queer," and that was like a statement that kids used to say openly, and teachers used to say it. And then we had Ellen DeGeneres, and I remember her career was destroyed for a couple of years. And this new generation remembers, well, the older generation remembers her as Mrs. Nice, and then Gen Z remembers her as a really mean old rich lady who just happens to be lesbian, right? But that shift, Akbar, that was that one shift I saw, and then the last year and a half, this sudden radicalization. I use the word on purpose, the radicalization of an entire generation, especially the young generation, who has seen a genocide live streamed to their phones. We've seen the poll numbers. That's been one marker, the Pew, the CNN poll, the Gallup poll. We saw Kneecap getting banned by BBC at Glastonbury. Then Bob Villan comes, is even more hard and blunt than Kneecap. You got white kids saying death to the IDF, right? Then you got Zoran Mamdani who now has 50% of the vote and has a majority of Jewish voters. All the attacks on him have not worked. And then you have this. I mean, you've been following this for the year and a half. Let's take us just the last year and a half. Your take on this sudden shift.
Yeah, think about where we were, say, on October 8th, 2023. It was impossible to conceive. I was here in Washington. I was talking to US officials, State Department officials, people on the Hill. The narrative was fully, even as dozens of Palestinians were killed in Israeli retribution just on that day, that the narrative was overwhelming support for Israel. We will never stop this. Israel is a US partner. And even as it became quite clear early in the Biden administration, that kind of first month, 6 weeks, a devastating air campaign, the biggest in history, right? Really worse than anything we've seen in the 21st century. People still, at an official level, did not feel comfortable speaking up in this way. Lawmakers did not, officials in the Biden administration did not. And so the fact that it shows you that there was a real desire and effort to say that the US could restrain Israel and see its policies be what the US said they were going to be, right? Shielding civilians, allowing in aid. The Biden administration consistently said, look, we're going to make them do that. It became so blatant month after month after month. And you reach that point, especially, I'd say, by the World Central Kitchen period, where just people were saying it's so obvious. Biden set up his red line over Rafah. The Israelis crossed the red line, and there was not a single consequence. And I think that also was a kind of, to your point of radicalization, it was a loss of faith, not just in the US-Israeli partnership. It was a loss of faith in people who represent people in this country, right? It was a loss of faith in President Biden, which we saw manifest itself in millions of Democratic-leaning voters stay home in November. And it was loss of faith among legislators saying, we want to be a new generation of US foreign policy. You're holding us back. You're keeping us in this dated paradigm, which there's a long-standing US relationship with Israel. That's not going to change. But the idea that the Israel of today is the Israel of even the 1990s, where peace was being discussed with the Palestinians, that's certainly not the case, right? And there was a real desire of why can't the Biden administration speak up to this? I think the other important turning point now, of course, it's the Israeli policy of total siege, right? And shutting down the international aid system. It's also, unfortunately, kind of cynically, it's easier for Democrats to bash a President Trump than a President Biden. And they are more willing to vote against US foreign policy when it's a Republican president. And that's kind of a big part of it. But it's also the way that people have seen Palestine now become an issue that is linked to every other issue of social justice and equality, right? Whether it's freedom of speech and expression, whether it is representation in government, whether it's gerontocracy, the fact that lawmakers just don't reflect their own people. And I don't think you can go back on that. No matter how, a lot of defenders of Israel have said Israel just needs to tell its story better. It's not a great story to sell. There's not really a way to tell it better.
And you mentioned the story to tell, and I've said ever since I saw what happened with Bob Dylan at Glastonbury, and I see the failed campaign to use Islamophobia, and it's just so comical. They have Zoran Mamdani condemn a slogan he's never used, but these senators who have given unconditional support to war criminal Netanyahu are never asked to condemn anything, right? But none of it's working. And you said story, and I said about a couple of weeks ago, I said I think Israel has lost, and I'll tell you why. It's lost the story. It's lost the youth. It's lost the culture. Once it loses those three things, it reminds me of 80s South Africa, right? Yes, there was power. Yes, but there's a couple things happening with Israel that's worse than South Africa. In addition to apartheid, because yes, there's apartheid in the West Bank and the occupied territories, there's also an ongoing genocide that's happening in Gaza right now, right? And also the expansion of settlements, right? So you got all these things happening in real time, and you still see Akbar, this resistance, right? Because yes, we've seen the 27 Democrats who've come out, and we'll talk about some of these names. But when I talk about the resistance to letting go, I call it the acorn of corporate money, the acorn of AIPAC, the acorn of ideological Zionism, right? Biden was incapable, and I'm so looking forward to your book because I give Biden credit where credit's due, but I said failure on Gaza, and this will haunt him and his legacy forever. The unwillingness to even meet the base. Because last year, I've been keeping the receipts. By this time last year, folks, a majority of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independents wanted to see a majority of the base was saying enough. And Democrats said, shut up. shut your mouth. And at the DNC, they wouldn't even have a Palestinian speaker. And then you said the YouGov poll came out and said that the main reason, not the only reason, the main reason why Dems stayed at home, not just the Arabs and the Palestinians and the Muslims, was because of the Gaza genocide. Okay, now, as this is happening, Akbar, you had that bipartisan photo with war criminal Netanyahu. That was just, folks, that was just a couple of weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago. And I want to mention the 14 Republican and Democratic senators took a chummy photo with Netanyahu, who was wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crime charges. The 59,000 Palestinians had died, and that's a low count. There were starving Palestinian children, famine. All right. These are the Democrats: Adam Schiff, Chuck Schumer, Jackie Rosen, Maria Cantwell, Chris Coons, Klobuchar. Wait for it, folks. Cory Booker. Explain this phenomenon to me, Akbar.
Yeah, I think there's a certain set of lawmakers for whom it's still inconceivable, right? They're kind of trapped in that Biden paradigm. Because look, what a lot of these, I think what folks sometimes miss is you are not going to get an anti-Zionist majority in the United States Congress. Then we are very, 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 very far from that. That's not the status of this country's political establishment. These are people who will define themselves as still friends of Israel, right?
Yeah.
And what those Democrats showed us, Booker, Schumer, Klobuchar, Rosen, Schiff, is they didn't seem to cotton on to what other Democrats were saying to them, which was, you can say you support Israel's long-term security, the safety of the Israeli people, and say this policy is not helping them. This policy is turning the world against them, is fueling greater extremism and resentment towards them and towards Jews in the diaspora. Additionally, I think there's a lot of people who just are not able to process new information on this issue, which is very akin to Biden, right? But Biden had the excuse that he was, by the time this war broke out, as Robert Hur described him, right, a well-meaning old man with a very poor memory. Cory Booker is not that. He's fairly young, fairly on the pulse.
Can I intervene very quickly? I think
Yeah.
you're giving Biden a pass because Biden, even in his advanced age, was
Hmm.
able to evolve on many issues. I give him
Yeah.
credit for crime, for example, right? When it
Yeah.
came to his progressive Build Back Better plan would have worked if not for Manchin and Cinema. So he was able, even in his advanced age and diminished capacities, to still change. On this issue, Akbar, he was stuck in the early 70s where apparently he still has wet dreams about a gold mine. So I can't give him a pass on this.
No, yeah, and I think that's fair. You absolutely shouldn't. But I think that's all the more reason to question people who are younger. Your Klobuchars, Bookers, Rosens. It's really unclear, and you can say that there's a real fear of losing a certain set of pro-Israel donors. But I think what we've seen in the kind of political realignment that we're seeing to a degree is a lot of those donors are maybe done with the Democratic Party anyway, right? Maybe you should be looking elsewhere. A lot of AIPAC's money now goes towards Republicans and goes towards intervening in Democratic primaries only to support people who are against other Democrats. So, is this
Jamal
who you want to
Bowman,
be quoting?
Cory Bush.
Right.
I mean, trying to go after Mamdani. And it's a very good point, right? The APAC nut, the ideological nut and the APAC nut that they cannot just let go of. But at the same time, explain to me then Mamdani, because we're talking about the trends, the markers that are showing you that the base, and not just the base, but a large part of MAGA, you covered this also, America
Yeah.
First, is shifting, right? Like Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But talk to us about the Mamdani effect and what the lessons that Democrats should learn about Mandani when it comes to this
Yes.
issue.
So I look at Mandani really through the lens, and I'll have a piece out about this soon, through the lens of uncommitted. It's almost exactly a year apart, right? And uncommitted was trying to say, we are within the Democratic Party structure saying, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, help us support you as people who feel really affected and moved by Gaza. And the response from the party was, we're not going to give you anything. Doran Mamdani was able to overcome that, I think, because there was a specific contest and a specific candidate. But he maybe wouldn't have gotten there without that organizing that already occurred and that kind of intercommunal community building. So I think you're seeing the Mamdani effect in the you're seeing how much is being thrown against him. So you're seeing the pushback, but I think many supporters of this would say, well, that's the death knells, and it will be an uphill battle. I mean, Mandani has not by any means won the mayorship yet, but the fact that he was able to take what was a very clear movement of intercommunal solidarity, Jewish Muslim solidarity, a lot of Jews saying this is not in our name. We are American Jews. We do not hold these values that are being implemented in Gaza. Uniting that with a lot of Muslims, Arabs, but also just people who were working class, people who were people of color, saying we feel there's a failed establishment. That's the link, right? And I think that coalition, you're not going to get, there's a limited amount of votes you can squeeze out, as we've seen, from the professional managerial class in big cities, right? It's really, you have to expand beyond that. I think Democrats, to a large degree, are showing they're aware of that.
And Zoran Mamdani is not winning in spite of his position on Gaza and Palestine. He's winning because of it. I'm sure you saw that poll that shows that a majority of young Jews are for Mamdani. A majority of black voters are for Mamdani. A majority of young white voters are for Mamdani. And yet still, Schumer, Gillibrand, and Hakeem Jeffries have not endorsed this man, who is like the coolest thing for the Democratic Party since AOC, another person they haven't respected. And it's unheard of to me that, here you have a guy going up against a friggin' predator who your own party vanquished years ago and has come back like, herpes and Cuomo and Silva and Eric Adams, and they still need to see more. And it's all because of Israel, Akbar. And I'm just like, your party has the lowest favorability rating since 1994. This is now a what? Like, tell me what you think about this because you've been following it. I believe, looking at all the numbers and the data, you cannot escape Israel and Palestine. This is an issue. Like depending on how you are on this issue, for Democrats moving forward, they will either support you or they won't support you. It has become clearly a major issue that is now even a bipartisan issue because for America
Yeah.
first.
Well, Bannon, I mean, look, I was at an event with Steve Bannon and have talked to his team a lot around their views on this. Bannon and kind of that MAGA movement had really been rallying. You didn't see a single Republican break. So, on this, I don't know if they still have built that power, but they're beginning to, right? But I just
Martin
wanted
Taylor
to,
Greene, MTG.
right, but no Republican senators. I mean, even Rand Paul, who has opposed military to other countries, did not oppose, which was surprising. But I would say on the point you raised earlier, I think is a really interesting one of people's ability to adapt and kind of sense shifting political winds. And, to your Schumer and Jeffries and Gillibrand, I would raise you Nancy Pelosi, who 18 months ago opposed offensive weapons for Israel. Well before any of these senators, she signed on to a letter saying, I, as the biggest Democratic fundraiser of a generation over decades, am not supporting a single additional offensive weapon for Israel. Don't try to get it past me. And not only did that not end Pelosi's career, but it links to kind of what you were saying about embracing AOC or not, right? Pelosi, when a lot of the party was saying, we don't want to deal with the squad, Pelosi a little bit brought in the AOCs and that squad, saying this is the future, and was ultimately vindicated them, right? Those are the Democratic superstars. I think the Schumers, etc. of the world who are not embracing Zoran will realize much as Pelosi's instincts also on Biden's candidacy proved to be appropriate for the Democratic Party, that they were kind of wrong. But I don't know if I'm going to see that wake up call moment necessarily from Candace Schumer or even Gillibrand. I think the people who are so interesting to me are the people who are sitting this fight out still. And by that I mean Ruben Gallego,
Yep.
Melissa Slotkin, who did not take this vote tonight. They didn't just vote no. They just Slotkin was on Stephen Colbert's show, which fine, but your brand is foreign policy, national security Democrat. It's not like your brand is all
CIA.
about this.
My
Right.
specialty is the Middle East.
Right. So this is a vote you might want to be there for. But I think the fact that even those people are right now sitting it out and kind of thinking to the wind, that tells you a lot.
And also, the Nevada senators, these Nevada senators are the same ones. I want to take an opportunity to shit on them because Cortez Masto and also Jackie Rosen. I think Jackie Rosen. Yes, Jackie Rosen was one of the senators who posed with Benjamin Netanyahu, but
Mm,
also Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen. The reason why we have Emile Bouvet, the supervillain with the lifetime appointment, is because they went along with Manchin and this Islamophobic smear campaign against Justice Manji did not vote for Biden's nominee, right? So I think these states are trying to like these bellwether states are trying to like see, ooh, let me play it safe. But Akbar, if reading the wind and the tea leaves or it just and seeing where people are, and not just progressive and young people, also Republicans, it is remarkable to me that not that more Democrats aren't jumping on it, right? Like this to me is it's because Netanyahu's getting worse. As this vote was happening, Israel killed even more unarmed Palestinians who were gathered at food aid sites. Even like 154 people have died from starvation. Like these images are going to get worse. You and I follow this. We know the end game of Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gavir. We know what they're doing in Gaza. We know what they want to do in West Bank. This story is not going to get prettier, Akbar.
No, and I think, look at the people who switched, right? So you mentioned Nevada, another swing state that is so narrow, so close to Wisconsin. Senator Tammy Baldwin switched her vote. She did not previously support these. But that also tells you this is someone who is getting minute to minute polling because they are in such a razor divided state. And she said, this is where Democrats in my state are. I think the figures the pictures are not going to get better. And I think that's one of the huge tragedies of this moment, right, is that it did take so long to get here. And a lot of deaths are already kind of baked in. Earlier this week, I interviewed an American doctor back from Gaza, and he talked about how he witnessed children whose stomachs were starting to digest themselves, right? They can't be refed. So his prediction was thousands of children are going to die no matter what, even if you surge aid, as people are saying, should happen. So those images, that record is a Trump record. It's also a Biden record. And that's something that the party will have to deal with because it's if people aren't stupid. They know when these people died and what happened and how we got here. And you just have to link that also to the question of American citizens, right? So consistently we've seen, you mentioned the West Bank a few times. I'm really glad you have. In the occupied West Bank, where there are many American citizens, there are people who are family members of Americans, regularly you have seen Americans killed, targeted, attacked, shot. At some point, there's going to be a call for legal accountability for that, right? And so far, administrations have been able to use executive privilege to say, well, let us handle this. Maybe that could be an excuse for the Biden administration, where a lot of lawmakers said, well, we have faith that there are competent people. In the Trump administration, where the Justice Department, State Department have been cleared out, there's not a lot of faith in leadership. Are you really going to accept that answer?
And Mike Huckabee, white Christian nationalist ambassador to Israel for the Trump administration, even he was forced to come out and condemn the killing of the U.S. citizen, the Palestinian American. Y'all didn't hear about it. It was in the news for one day. But yep, Israel killed a U.S. citizen, and it was news for a day. And some people put in pressure that even Mike Huckabee had to say, no, this is wrong. And speaking about these 27 senators who just voted today, 3 of them are Jewish Americans. We have Bernie Sanders, Brian Schatz of Hawaii, and Ossoff of Georgia, right? So this is something that I think is really, again, it's really pretty fascinating. And on Sunday News, you saw Chris Van Hollen. Chris Van Hollen has gone hard in the paint on this issue. That's a name I think people should focus on. Why has Van Hollen been very vocal for the past year?
Van Hollen is, I would say, no one has been more effective in leading the resistance in Washington to the Gaza policy than Chris Van Hollen. And that is because he is, excuse me, Sander, if you're watching this, but the most generic, soft-spoken Maryland white man you could ever imagine. And this very cautious person, 66 years old, the average age of a US senator, for him to be doing this, you can't say it's your AOC's, Ilhan Omar's, Bernie Sanders, wild hair. This is Chris Van Hollen, who everyone thinks is a charming gentleman. And he is saying, from my analysis of the situation, this is just unacceptable. And I'd say, why is he the leader? He's been really determined in identifying US laws that Israel appears very likely to have violated. Israel, of course, says they have not violated any laws, they respect US and international law. Van Hollen has been kind of forensic in saying, here's this law on US humanitarian aid that you are violating. Here's this law on killing US citizens you're violating. And in the Biden administration, he forced concessions from them consistently because he was someone they weren't able to kind of write off. And why does he think that way? I mean, you have to remember this is someone who, before October 7th, was speaking up for Palestinian rights. So he's been
Right.
briefed on this issue. He was advocating for Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an American citizen journalist who was shot by an Israeli soldier, very likely war crime. Van Hollen has sought accountability and justice, and I think much earlier than other people in his party realized it wasn't a matter of just we can trust our friends either in the Democratic Party or in the Israeli government.
I'm going to ask you a question and step away for 5 seconds to get the charger, but I'm listening to you. Talk to me about Angus King's pretty bold statement from earlier this
Yeah,
week. And I'm coming right back.
yeah,
I'm listening to my charger.
totally. Angus King, who is an independent senator from Maine, like Bernie Sanders, an independent senator from Vermont, said he would not support any future aid to Israel. And that's notable because Israel receives upwards of $3 billion in US military aid every year. A lot of that goes through various vehicles. It's not just these kind of weapon sales that can be brought up for a vote. It's really the question of how can you use the appropriations process? How can you use other processes that Congress has jurisdiction over to stop that supply? And the fact that Angus King, again, someone who is not seen by any means as a firebrand in the Senate, is talking about this, that's big. And it's also an acknowledgement of something I think, you mentioned earlier the Obama era. I think it's helpful to just put it in the context of that. Netanyahu was prime minister under Obama, treated him terribly, obviously, uh, opposed the Iran deal, continued expansion. But I think a lesson a lot of liberals took away maybe from Obama was Netanyahu is going to be rude to us and awful, and there's nothing we can do about it. And
Right.
I just think that what Angus King and a lot of senators are now saying is that is not the case. We have a lot of American leverage. Let's start to use it. And that's something that the Israelis now thought was in question. Early in the Biden era, they did think their aid might be reduced or might be slashed. And Biden very quickly made clear they had effectively a blank check. Now senators are saying you don't have that blank check. And importantly, Obama negotiated this 10-year program of $3 billion in military aid for Israel each year from 2016. That expires next year, right? Someone else is going to have to negotiate that. Is Congress and the Trump administration, which is facing a lot of heat still from the right wing over this. And I think the Trump administration already tonight, they issued a White House statement supporting the arms deals that Bernie and the Democratic senators are trying to block.
Mm.
You saw some of those MAGA figures come out and say, we're so disappointed. This is not what we want. Why are you not allowing credibility?
And also the anger of the
Credibility.
sorry, Billu really enjoys what you're saying, so he's around. So I hope you guys don't mind. And I have to hold my phone like this because I've run out of juice because I've done like 5 hours today. So forgive me for those who are distracting, but just listen to this is folks, this is America 2025. All right, so just roll with it. But I'm glad you mentioned that because it's also the Trump administration is feeling the pressure. They were promised America first, and Donald Trump got dog walked by Benjamin Netanyahu yet again, and he did that strike against Iran that temporarily threatened to take us into World War III. And now we found out that didn't even destroy the uranium, didn't really destroy the sites, but what it did do was thoroughly angered the base, including Tucker Carlson and a whole bunch of others who said you lied to us, and Tucker Carlson then completely humiliated and mocked Ted Cruz, which I hate this timeline because I had to give credit to Tucker Carlson for doing it, right? But they're feeling the pressure too, folks, and even Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think like we said, unfortunately, things are going to get far worse. So this position, this unconditional support for Israel that Schumer and a few other people have, it is going to be untenable. And, I want to concentrate on the victims for a second, Akbar, because I don't think people realize what's happening. Just focus on this week. Tell
Yeah.
people what Palestinians in Gaza are enduring right now.
It's an incomprehensible situation of devastation, death and almost no hope. So what you have is 2.1 million people. The vast majority of them bend into less than 15% of Gaza's territory, which is already a very small territory. We're talking about territory smaller than the state of New Jersey, right? So you have 2.1 billion people, very, very few resources, no aid distributed for since almost March. People who are facing gunshot wounds when they go to try and get supplies. And what I hear from people on the ground is very much, it's often men who are sent, they are shot in the head, temple, chest, or often the groin, which is an extremely painful place to shoot people. There's a lot of blood vessels there. It's a complicated surgery. And then you have these Palestinian medical workers because there are not, they're not allowing in huge medical supplies. So the only treatment you can possibly get is from these people who are themselves exhausted, malnourished, displaced, all of that. And then you have just this unbelievable level of malnutrition. What the WFP said earlier this week is this is unprecedented in the 21st century. And what's important for people to realize, I think, unfortunately, we are, comfortably in the West and a little desensitized to able to say, well, this is how things have always been in these far off places. People are always in need. Gaza did face a blockade, but the reason why Gaza's dip in nutrition has been so shocking to people is Palestinians managed to still have an economy. They still managed to grow. They had agriculture. Almost all the food supplies local to Gaza, native to Gaza, have been destroyed. There's nothing coming in. So people can't even rely on native shrubs, right? I mean, there was a report earlier today talking about the fact that even in the limited supplies that are now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said we are allowing in minimal humanitarian supplies. So there are minor shipments being permitted to go in, very hard to distribute because, again, don't forget, while this mass starvation is still happening, that starved population is living in a war zone.
Yep.
Airstrikes, shooting, raids are ongoing across Gaza. So aid workers can't distribute. They're not allowing in even olives with pits in them, reportedly, because they don't want the seed to be planted to allow an olive tree to grow. Right? So this is a level of devastation. And I'll just say, I had an opportunity to report from Gaza before the war, and thinking about the society I saw that the people I met there, even under blockade, right, that they were able to build and find ways to be innovative, even when they weren't allowed to have in concrete or medical supplies. There was a level of ingenuity and survival instinct. It's now totally ripped to shreds because what also people are talking about is this is a society that's destroyed. And I think that's something that's hinted at in the genocide determinations that are increasingly coming out, including from Israeli groups. It's
Yeah,
not just
that's what I'm
that's
just
it.
that.
Yeah, it's not just the physical nature of a society, it's the soul of a society, right? If people are so desperate, they're kind of torn apart, even in their communities, in their families, in their neighborhoods, you have destroyed a society effectively, right? It's not about the death toll, which of course is, as you mentioned, probably an undercount and is very likely to increase.
The death toll officially has reached 60,000 as of this week, but the Lancet Medical Journal has said that it's a low count, and the Lancet Medical Journal says that's probably 40% higher, and we still haven't taken into account the child amputees. Israel has made more child amputees in Gaza than in any other place on earth. More children have been killed in Gaza by Israel in the past almost 2 years now, folks, than all the children killed in war zones combined. UNICEF had said that thanks to this, well, not thanks to, I don't want to use that word, but due to Israel's blockade, folks, this is man-made famine. This is man-made famine and hunger. Israel deliberately has done the blockade based on a lie that just the Israeli military earlier this week debunked. Right, the Israeli government said, "Oh, we got to do this blockade because Hamas is stealing the aid." Israeli military came out and said, "No, actually, we have no proof of Hamas stealing the aid." Right. So as a result, UNICEF said that the people who have been killed, 80% have been children. And to make it even, it's just, I'm going to say this because I can. I don't want you to get fired. Anyone who still supports this, Akbar, is a genocidal sociopath. There's something missing in you. You are comfortable dehumanizing an entire group of people that allows you just to condone or rationalize a genocide. Because, folks, since May, Israel has killed more people, more Palestinians in Gaza than were killed within Israelis that died and were murdered by Hamas, the terrorist attack on October 7th. And specifically, these people that were killed were starving, unarmed Palestinian civilians who went to food aid distribution sites in Gaza, and IDF soldiers said they were commanded to pick them off and kill them. And Akbar, the connection that people fail to make, and this, I want to ask you this. I want to ask you this one more question. And thanks for taking the time. I know it's so late. Thanks for the nearly 700 people who joined at midnight. For those who joined a bit late, I'm talking to Akbar, Shahid Ahmed, senior reporter, journalist at Huffington Post, who's been following this war for 2 years, has a book coming out on the Biden administration's, in my opinion, failure of Gaza and complicity in Gaza. But a lot of people ask, they don't connect the dots. They're like, all right, well, how does my taxpayer dollar connect to the genocide? Like, why do you all blame U.S.? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I think that point is raised often because also people will then say, and supporters of Israel will then say, well, look at Sudan, look at these other huge humanitarian
Uyghurs,
crises,
Rohingya.
the Uyghurs in China. There is, the Israeli Air Force could not launch a single flight without being supplied by the United States, right? So any single airstrike is linked back to the United States. This is a military that is in inseparable from the US defense establishment and importantly from US money. So, there's also comparisons drawn to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which did a terrible, devastating offensive in Yemen. They paid for their weapons. Not that that makes it okay, but Israel is buying American weapons with American taxpayer dollars, right? And then using them. Every single aspect of Israeli policy in Gaza is not just enabled by US military support, it's enabled by US diplomatic support, by policy support. And what's important to remember there is those were choices the Biden administration was intimately aware of. The Trump
Yep.
administration has, shut down US aid and removed a lot of that diplomatic expertise. But in the kind of shaping period of this war, the foundation to how we got here, there were US officials who knew every single detail of how every Israeli checkpoint and inspection worked and essentially greenlit it. Essentially said, that's okay, you can still continue to get weapons. And that's why these lawmakers are upset now, because they're saying it's a matter of you're violating our own laws. The US's own laws say if you are blocking US humanitarian aid, you cannot get US weapons. So
And that was the
there's
vote today, right? That was one of the justification for the vote today.
precisely. Right. And so it's and people, of course, there's the Leahy law, which was a separate law, which, we can get into, but there's all sorts of laws, but people feel, the argument from supporters of Israel will often be, why are you singling out Israel? You're obsessed with Israel. And the response often, rightly, is every other country that does this does face scrutiny from the US, right? Turkey, when it was targeting Armenia and Azerbaijan in the 90s, was facing questions and scrutiny over its treatment. So other US allies have. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
No, but
Side.
it is. It's late, but
Yeah.
this is number one. I think, and my answer to this always is, because oftentimes it's a bad faith question, is first and foremost, I do talk about Uyghurs and the China genocide. I do talk about the Rohingya and what's happening to them in Myanmar. I do talk about Ukraine and the occupation. I do talk about what's happening in Sudan because I try to be morally consistent. However, with Israel, many Americans feel like our votes and our money can actually in real time change policy because it is so tied to the Israeli defense system and the occupation, right, of the Palestinian people. Without U.S. weapons, without U.S. money, without U.S. diplomatic cover and support, Israel cannot occupy the Palestinians. Israel cannot expand these settlements, and Israel cannot continue its genocide in Gaza. All it takes literally is a phone call. We've seen it in the past. Reagan picked up the phone and called Begin in the 80s, or Eisenhower did it, right? So I think that's why I always tell people is we feel that at the very least here, they're like, why do Muslims care and Arabs care and you don't care about Saudi Arabia? I'm like, we do, but Saudi Arabia does not claim to be a democratic society. It is an autocratic society, right? But in the United States of America, we feel like we have enough levers as Americans and we have enough of a moral standing because it's our taxpayer dollars that we can say enough is enough. We do not help our friend drive drunk. And then once our friend drives drunk and kills people, we say, now, Israel, we're going to punish you with more money.
I just know, I think it gets really overlooked. Biden did pick up the phone once, and it had a real impact. After the World Central Kitchen killing of 7 workers, many of them foreign, after many, almost 200 Palestinian aid workers had already been killed, Biden picked up the phone, said to Netanyahu, we will reevaluate the US relationship with Israel. And what happened over the next month was aid went up, airstrikes went down, right? And that's a thing where in my reporting for my book on the Biden administration, so many of their officials have said to me, we look at that period and think, wow, we could have been doing that for the 6 months prior to April. We chose not to do that after April, which brought us to this point. So even within just this period, post October 7th, this is really government, this is really leadership, because often the excuse is Netanyahu will find a way to outsmart and outfox the US and work with AIPAC. Biden did do it for a while, and there were clear results. So it's really a choice to not do that.
And this is my final question, and it's a tease up to your book. I don't bend the knee to Democrats or Republicans. Clearly, I don't do both sides either. I tried my best to convince people that they should vote for Harris over Trump. But I've always said that this is Biden's war and Trump's war, that both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have been complicit in Netanyahu and this Israeli regime's genocide of Palestinians. You have to also blame Biden, and right now, due to the time, you have to put more blame on Biden. And without the President Biden and the circle that was around him, without their ideological support for Israel, without them giving a green light to Netanyahu, this war would not have happened. Am I being unfair? Because some Democrats say, "Why do you always blame, Biden, and why aren't you blaming Trump?" I'm like, I blame both. But President Biden, his trademark empathy, was all but missing for Palestinians. Aaron David Miller, I remember in this interview I read in New Yorker with Isaac Chotiner. He worked in the State Department, and he said that, Chotiner asked him, like, well, did Clinton or Biden ever cry for Palestinians like they cried for Rabin? And Aaron David Miller said, you know what? No. And I don't think they have the same level of empathy for Palestinians that they have for Israelis. And even the stupid, boneheaded decision that Democrats made to send Bill Clinton to Michigan right before the election. You sense that like they couldn't even fake it, Akbar. So the question I have for you, because you're writing this book, is yes, AIPAC, and yes, the money, and yes, the national security angle, and military-industrial complex. But how much of this is ideological and based on just cold-hearted dehumanization and Islamophobia?
I think for the Biden administration, it's so important to remember not only that Biden had a dated view, but that so many of his advisors, including his top Middle East advisor, Brett McGurk, came out of the war on terror. You would not have Israel's war in Gaza post October 7th without US practices post 9/11.
Yep.
It's a direct line of tolerating a certain level of civilian harm, of bending international law, right? Of kind of saying that when the powerful do it, it's okay. And of it's kind of cowardice, I think is a major factor here, which is it's not even the active decisions to permit something, because it's very hard. There's not going to be a document saying, "Oh, we woke up today and decided to do these horrible things." It's the silence, and complicity is a word you used. Often what I hear from people talking about how the Biden administration brought us to this place is they would say, well, look, we got these 50 trucks in, or we did convince the Israelis to open another crossing. Look, are you measuring it based on what you feel is good for you and what is you're able to show, or the actual impact for Palestinians? Because that was clearly getting worse. And instead of questioning that on the inside, a lot of the Biden folks were willing to say, look at us, rah, and not question their leadership. And to justify that initially by saying, well, the president has these outdated views, justified later by saying, well, we have to win the election and not hand it over to Trump. But I'd really argue, and data bears this out, your Gaza policy helped hand the reins to Trump, right? So it wasn't defending against Trump's victory. It was really laying the groundwork. So I think that there's a lot of accountability that needs to happen there, because there were people who told them frequently, you could do this differently.
And you have much more sources than I do, and you've spent 2 years, and your book is coming out in a few months. But I also have friends in the administration,
Yeah.
and they have echoed this just utter lack of care, this lack of empathy, this lack of concern, this type of green light to Netanyahu, this ideological commitment towards Zionism, and this, post 9/11 mindset. That was, by the way, a failed mindset. And they're talking
Mm.
about how Biden was surrounded by yes men, and let's name and shit on these people. I have nothing to lose. Brett McGurk,
Jake
Jake
Sullivan.
Sullivan, Kirby, Blinken, and many people within the outer ring within the Biden administration knew this was wrong, knew this was immoral. So many people, not just Muslims and Arabs, folks. The first person
Yeah.
to resign was a white person, said enough is enough. And this was last year, folks. Last year, there were people resigning. A few of them went public. Jews, white women, white
Yes.
men. This is wrong, and we cannot penetrate this circle. So this is where I feel, bringing back full circle, fast forward nearly 2 years, to have 27 senators, 26 Democrats, and Bernie Sanders, so I'll just say 27, to have a majority of Democratic senators vote on this. Yes, the bar is so low it's in hell. It's still huge, but the fact
Huge.
that even after this, still you couldn't get, oh, I don't know, all of them. You couldn't get a Booker or a Schumer, shows you that we have a way to go. And the fact that Mamdani, who has now 50% of the vote, has a majority of Jewish support, has Brad Lander's support, still has not gotten the endorsement from Gillibrand, Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries, probably explains why the Democratic Party has its lowest favorability rating, and not enough people see where the winds are blowing. Akbar, final word to you, sir.
I just say, I think often people can look at this and feel that nothing can change. There's change happening. And I think that's so important to remember that it might not save lives now, but it can save lives in the future. And there's a real, more honest conversation, and there's a door open for people to kind of express their views and try to make politics represent what they're thinking.
Absolutely, folks. Amy Klobuchar 2 weeks ago took a photo with Benjamin Netanyahu, heard about it. Today, she was one of the 27 who said no. And also some folks, like you said, the senator, you said someone from Michigan. Who did it? No. The senator from Michigan, Tina Smith, did.
Tammy Baldwin from
And
Wisconsin. True.
Wisconsin. So,
Yeah.
folks, this is, I think you got to put the pressure. Akbar, you joined me exhausted. I spoke
Yeah.
longer than I thought I would. I should have been resting. For those, there's nearly 800 people who joined us. If we did this earlier in the night, we would have had probably 1,500. But, uh, folks, I'll have this up in about an hour. So I strongly recommend listening to Akbar. He's been on this for 2 years for Huffington Post. He's the senior journalist who's been covering specifically this war. He has a book coming out in April, specifically on the Biden administration's response to and/or support of Israel's war, which is a genocide, which has killed at least 60,000 people, and now people are starving to death. Children, over 150 people have died, mostly kids, from starvation, man-made starvation, thanks in part due to U.S. complicity, our taxpayer dollars, diplomatic support, and weapons. Akbar, shamelessly promote yourself.
You can find me on Twitter at Akbar Ahmed, on Blue Sky at akbarshahid.huffpost.com. I'm closely following developments in Gaza. And if you have information that should be in my book on Biden's Gaza record, you can reach me on Signal at akbar.58. Thanks so much, Shahid.
Thank you, Akbar. And you stayed up late. This has been The Left Hook, folks. I'll have this up, like I said, in an hour or 30 minutes or less. I know some people joined in late. Strongly recommend you hear it. We've talked about 40. We've been talking for 40 minutes. There'll be a transcript. As always, there's no paywalls. Everything is for free. You pay what you can. If you have a few bucks, consider becoming a paid subscriber. I have a bunch of kids, but if not, it's okay. I believe people should be informed during the fight for democracy against fascists. Everyone be kind, be empathetic, take care of yourself, speak out against this genocide. Speak out in your home, speak out in your community, speak out with your family, speak out in social media. Think about your children. Think about how you want to show up in your children's history books. And silence right now is also complicity, folks. And as Akbar said, the tide is turning. Never in my life would I have thought you would get 27 senators. Never in my life. Look at my gray hair, folks. I've been around for a while. So Akbar and me are both shocked. And I know the people are cynical. They're like, only 27? But the way politics works, folks, to get 27 to say no to funding Israel, wow. That happened tonight, folks. So be kind, be empathetic, and please, no, please don't be a fascist. Akbar, thank you, buddy.
Thanks for that. Okay, take care.